Well, it's been a while, but we're back with episode 3. So, yeah, so, you know, I guess now's I don't know if it's a good time or a bad time, but might as well. So, today's March 4th. Today's the 4th, I think. Yeah, today's the 4th. I was trying to remember what day it is. Yeah, so today's March 4th, and, apparently we're at war now. There's, anyone who's been paying attention to the news will know that war basically just exploded in the Middle East. And I guess there's a few things to break down about it. And it really is kind of hard to say it all at once because there's constantly updates about it. Every hour, every minute, really, there's updates. New airstrikes, new retaliatory airstrikes, explosions, fires, stuff like that. Excuse me. And yeah, that's basically what's happening. So yeah, I don't really know where to go from. I don't really know where to start, but basically, in the Middle East, war broke out, particularly against Iran. Early Saturday morning, would have been just past midnight for me because I live in the Central Time Zone. Early Saturday morning is when both the U.S. and Israel launched the first airstrikes on Iran. And it's just been escalating constantly ever since then. I mean, they struck Iran, and Iran retaliated by striking, areas in Israel, and then also several areas in the up and down the Persian Gulf. They've been hitting all the Gulf states. Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and amongst others. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of stuff going on there. And, not really sure where to go from here. But, unfortunately, the death toll has kept increasing since then. And, yeah, it doesn't really show any signs of slowing down. There's been hundreds, if not 1,000 plus Iranians killed, a dozen or so Israelis killed, already 6 American servicemen killed, and amongst a couple other civilians in the Gulf states and stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically what's been going on for the past 4 days or so, roughly. And it really is tough because this clearly is a war that is not in America's interests, and a lot of people are convinced, rightfully so, that this is Israel's war that they essentially dragged us into. And it makes sense because this is a war that they've been wanting for a very long time. I mean, really ever since the, early to mid 90s, when the Israelis out of nowhere decided to start demonizing the Iranians. They've wanted regime change of some kind. And for decades at this point, they've wanted it. And, they've sort of got it. They sort of didn't. Because on the very first day, airstrikes killed the Ayatollah. But the regime itself seems to be still in place. And, who knows where it's going to go from here. It's very hard to determine whether or not the regime, the government itself, will survive the war. I mean, it's expected to be a 4-week-long campaign. So, there is, of course, the likelihood that the regime could last throughout the war. through the end of the war and afterwards, but we don't really know. Who knows? So, but yeah. And yeah, it's not very fun. It's not very fun. And it really is unfortunate because that is the biggest story in the news right now. And then, of course, the second biggest story was that there was a shooting down in Austin, Texas, and many suspect that it's blowback from the war. I don't really know for sure. I guess at this point there's no real way to really tell if it is direct blowback or if it was just a coincidentally it was just some nut job who decided to, go crazy and all that stuff. So who knows? But the war itself is the main story that's been, that's taken over the internet, that's been dominating the news cycle. And yeah, it's not very fun to constantly be watching videos of missiles landing and hitting the ground, or missiles knocking down, apartment buildings and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's not very fun, but, unfortunately nowadays, when we live in the era of aerial warfare, especially the drone technology, that is just a reality that's just a reality that occurs. And so, yeah, I don't really know where things go from here, but it does appear that this war will keep going until, I guess it's very likely that the war is going to keep going until the regime fully collapses and that there's nothing left. Unfortunately, Iran is a big country. It's got, 92 million people. And, obviously there are people who are relieved or celebrating the fact that the Ayatollah was killed. And, sure, I guess I don't blame them to a certain extent. But the thing you got to remember is that if you have even just a few million of the people that live there who supported the Ayatollah or were loyal to him, then what does that say about what happens next? Like, we don't know what's going to happen next, but that itself is a very good recipe for an insurgency. And yeah, that definitely is, that's kind of a buzzword, insurgency, because anyone who knows anything about the Iraq War knows that, insurgency, you heard that word all the time. And so, I guess overall, we're still processing it. We're still trying to process specifically how this war happened. Although I've seen certain reports indicating specifically the specific lead up to the war beginning. And I don't feel for this episode like going into detail on the entire history of what led up to this. I suppose maybe I could do that for episode 4, but yeah, that's basically the big news story. And yeah, it's funny, I said that, it's funny, I said on episode 2, the previous episode, that starting on episode 3, we were going to report the news. We were going to, I was going to give an overview of, news events, what's happening in the news. And, I kept, it's funny, I kept procrastinating making this episode over and over again. Doing this recording, I kept procrastinating over and over again. And, I was actually supposed to do it over a week ago, but, I will say it would have been definitely not as interesting as this, as the topic that I'm, covering for my first recording, first and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's really not fun. It's not very, It definitely wasn't something that I was expecting on doing, but, you can't exactly, you can't always correctly predict or the news. You can't control the news either. So it really is unfortunate what's going on over there, and I really do hope that somehow that there can be an off ramp to this, and that it gets brought to an end. I really do. And unfortunately, there appears to be nothing right now. I mean, right now, this is this whole war is a train with no brakes. And it shows no sign of stopping or slowing down. So, who knows what's going to happen next? Like, literally, who knows? No, we really have no idea what's about to happen next. We have no idea if... we have no idea what's going to happen next. So, yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, really all I wanted to do for this episode was do an overview, and I don't know, I suppose for episode 4 I can provide more updates on that and possibly get into the history a little bit. Who knows? But yeah, that's kind of just what I felt like doing for my first official report, I guess. So yeah, so that's pretty much what we're going to cover in episode 4 in the next episode. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess.